Joining me on the podcast today, I like to call him the people's champ of the MFFLs throughout the course of the year. He has done a terrific job covering the Dallas Mavericks and does so for DallasBasketball.com. Grant Afseth joining me here on the podcast. Grant, what's going on?
Not much. Looking forward to talking about the Mavs. There's not too much else going on in Mavs land for sure.
I appreciate you taking the time with me. Yeah, I think for a lot of Mavs fans, a disappointing year, obviously. We're so used to seeing this team, at least over the last few years, be in the playoffs and them not only make the playoffs, not only not make the playoffs, but not make the play-in at all either. And what was a disappointing year. If you had to describe, Grant, the Mavs season in one word, what word would you use to describe the Mavericks in that way?
That's a good question. I think it's probably an easy one, but probably just disappointing. I think would probably just be the best way because after making the trade for Kyrie, there was talk about, oh, we could be a contender, like title contender, and then you tank the last couple of games, or deflating, I should say. Deflating is probably my word. Yeah, I'll go with deflating.
Yeah. I think for a lot of Mavs fans, that would be the couple of words that they would choose. Disappointing, deflating, weird would probably be another word that may come to mind. From your vantage point, what went wrong? I know there's a lot of things that did. You can talk about defensively, some of the things that didn't work from some of the free agent moves that they made with JaVale McGee and Christian Wood. But what for you, as you observed this team throughout the course of the year, felt like went wrong the most for this team?
Yeah, I think a lot of it probably had to do with balancing big picture potential. Are we going to go through growing pains of trying something new, or are we just going to rely on what we're comfortable with from what worked last year? And then those things that worked last year, like the defensive approach, lineups and things of that nature, they didn't actually work that fantastic. So I think even apprehension to try new things, and then going back to things that are comfortable, they weren't necessarily reliable whenever they did go back to those kind of like comfort zones, if you will.
And it was interesting watching this team as it went on, some of the things that they tried to change schematically at times. I'm interested in your take on this because it felt like, at least in the early portion of the year, teams were like, look, we're going to dare Luka to score 50 and try to wear him out and try to make these other guys beat them. Did you see some of that? Because obviously we'll get to Kyrie Irving, during the second half of the year in a little bit. But in the early part of the year, did it feel like teams were just saying, look, Luka, go ahead and go get your 50. And if you beat us, great, but we'll see and take our chances with you guys.
Yeah, I definitely think that is how it was, against teams like the Rockets and even the Spurs and those types of teams that are rebuilding, even needing to kind of get to that extra gear to get a win, when in other situations, if you kind of had a more complete roster, those should instead be games where he's not even playing the fourth quarter, as opposed to having to get one or two gears higher to get to 50. That's I think that's definitely a good way to kind of summarize the buildup of kind of the exhaustion, or the fatigue that kind of became an issue later on in the year, is when you need to rely on the 50-point game, 40-point game, the 30-point game right out of the gate for 8-9 straight games. That has a wear that kind of builds up, and that's why some of those older veterans, even like a Kyrie Irving, they pick their spots more. But then that's part of the issue that we'll probably get into, is you got to build a team where the guy can pick his spots and still be successful for sure.
Yeah, of course, the culminating game that we saw from Luka this year, the 60-20 game that he had against the New York Knicks, still incredible to think about what he did that night and all the things that went into that particular game. But you started to touch on it with Kyrie Irving, this team obviously making the move at the trade deadline, moving on from Dorian Finney-Smith, Spencer Dinwiddie, sending them to Brooklyn and trading a first-round pick along with it, getting Kyrie Irving. When you look at how those two meshed on the floor together, when they had the time to be on the floor together, what did you see from the two of them that should give Mavs fans the idea that these two in concert can really make some magic going into next year and beyond?
Yeah, for sure. I think in general, Kyrie has a lot of experience. Like, you can go back to LeBron and, Kevin Durant, those types of guys playing with superstars. Like that kind of goes into the narrative aspect. But when you see it in practice, like he picks his spots in the first quarter. Sometimes, you'll even have it be a little bit too passive with him trying to adjust to a new team where I think I remember in Indiana, even the Pacers broadcast was like, "Why is Kyrie Irving spending so much time in the corner?" Like I think with the training camp in an early season kind of process that they did not get, you can kind of work in and install more things in the offense and have more familiarity. I just think that's like when you kind of drop Kyrie into a team mid-season, something that he's never done before. I think there was more of a like kind of desire to be like, all right, I'm an add-on to what this team's doing. I think he even said that a couple of times, as opposed to like, all right, we're gonna just like kind of take this apart and really rework this on the fly. I think it was more of like this team was fourth when I got here. Like I'm not going to be like demonstrative or destructive to what they're doing. I mean, obviously it ended up being a thing where they didn't even make the play in. But like I think that's kind of something that he did allude to a lot is like, like I've never had this experience where I have not been in a training camp with the team that I finished the season with. Like a midseason trade is just new territory. But I do think like, in principle, Luka's like the NBA's leading first quarter scorer, so he can kick things off. Vince Carter even kind of said that in an interview that he did, I think with the Fort Worth Star Telegram, just kind of that like NBA Hall of Fame or superstar, former star kind of perspective. And then like Kyrie can kind of carry that second unit as he did whenever Luka goes to the bench, and then just in late games, it's kind of a feel situation where it's like who's got the matchup, how are they playing us, who can get an advantage. And I think that's the stuff that you just build with experience playing together. Like you can't really like manufacture feel or continuity. You kind of just have to go through it and see like, oh, okay, well, he likes to do this when he's like backing down on like in the post. Oh, he likes to get to this spot, all that stuff. Like that's what you got to just kind of go through the wins and losses and those kind of experiences together to fully like kind of understand and appreciate.
Did this team miss opportunities, Grant, in your mind with Luka and Kyrie as screeners for each other? We didn't see a lot of that from the two of them when they got together. Are there more opportunities for them to play off of each other that way? Luka maybe playing a little more off ball, given what Kyrie can do offensively. What schematically do you think could change based on the way these two are able to build the kind of continuity that they should going into next year, if Kyrie is back, of course?
Yeah, I think they could have utilized that a little more. I also think that Luka could have been utilized more off the ball with Kyrie kind of initiating things. But that's also something that you kind of like as we just talked about, like Kyrie has to know the offense at a high level. He's got to like be super familiar with it. And I remember like because it was relatively similar circumstances with the midseason trade. Like I asked Doc Rivers before the Mavs played the Sixers, like basically like what was the biggest adjustment and how long did it take for James Harden to kind of get familiar with Philly. And he said like it's very hard to put the ball in the hands of someone who doesn't know what you're doing. And it took until the summer, like midway through the summer, where it fully like kind of like unlocked for Harden, and he kind of fully understood what they were trying to do, and the nuances of their offense. And then it made going into next season a lot easier with them having like the pick and roll chemistry with Joel Embiid and things of that nature. So I think that's why it's kind of harder to necessarily say like they could have done a lot of like put Luka in off like pin downs and just different stuff. I think they could have done a little more of that, but that's also something that I would like to just kind of see how they approach it after the training camp and a little more time together when they're like installing the offense from the start. So that's why it's kind of hard to like necessarily fault too much with like schematics and all, because there's so much nuances that I feel like go into it that like it's a lot easier for me just to say like, why did Jason Kidd not just like do more of this action, that action, all that stuff? But like when you're in the the actual like game environment and all that stuff, it's a lot different. So like I'll just be curious, if they run it back, of course. with Kyrie's free agency, like how that kind of looks as they have that time to kind of add layers and all that stuff to the whole mix.
And we'll touch on Kyrie a little bit more throughout the course of our time here, but you started to allude to something that I think was one of the more polarizing aspects of this season. And as someone that was covering this team on the ground, traveling and seeing this team on a night-to-night basis, a lot was made of Jason Kidd and the rotations at times that he used, some of the decision-making, whether it be after timeout plays, lack of calling timeouts. Where do you stand with Jason Kidd when it comes to the success that he had in year one, taking this team to the Western Conference Final, to ultimately them not even making the play-in? Where are you at with Jason Kidd when it comes to him being the coach of this team?
Yeah, I definitely think like the responding in the locker room to the coach's voice, like that stuff that's really hard to kind of know, like unless you're one of the players involved or like really like kind of in the locker room in those situations. So I think it's hard to necessarily like point to any of that aspect of the coaching, kind of like evaluation, if you will. But I think like there are definitely some areas that could be improved, like something that just constantly kind of like sticks out when I just think about the season. Just that Milwaukee close game that they had, where the Bucks clearly knew what the Mavericks were going to get into with a down screen before they did it. Luka knew that they knew and was kind of like what, like hello, like is anyone home, like on the coaching staff, like hello, like anyone on the bench,
Can we do something different, please?
yeah, like this is gonna look really really ugly if this and we lose. And then he kind of had that like he kind of showed his frustration at like half court, like kind of like pumping his fist or whatever he did, like he was definitely like dissatisfied or whatever you want to call, like upset with that. So things like that, like it's hard to be really really like efficient in those situations because it's such like high degree of difficulty. The other team's really locked in on their details and all that stuff. So it's like like it's kind of like game winners, like with players when you look back at percentages, like if you think about like the most clutch player, their percentage is probably quite a bit lower in reality on like that like game winning shot attempt, like Kobe Bryant's, LeBron's, like Michael Jordan, even like it's probably lower than what you would like be like, oh wow, that's a little surprising if you really like look at it. So I think it's kind of hard to like necessarily be like, oh well, they could have won like 5 to 7 to 10 more games just purely off of like if the end result would have like gone their way. That's true, but like also at least the approach could have been better, because like the results you can live with as long as the approach kind of gave you a better chance. There was too many like Luka 30-foot step back type shots that were kind of relied on in those situations that I felt like, there's definitely some fine tuning. I think kind of with them, not to ramble too much, but with the experience, like kind of like pursuit to add to to the coaching staff, like, someone who's got head coaching experience, that's probably an area that, you would hope that is boosted or improved with a voice of that kind, for sure.
Yeah, there's been reports by Mark Stein, who's covered the league course for a long time, formerly the Dallas Morning News, and now does his work with Substack, that former head coaches like James Borrego with the Charlotte Hornets, Jeff Hornacek, longtime coach in the league as well, former player, could be potential adds to the coaching staff for Jason Kidd, as Greg St. Jean is reportedly not going to be back as part of the staff for Jason Kidd this upcoming season. Speaking of offense and polarizing individuals, we touched on Jason Kidd. Grant, I don't think there was any more polarizing player for the Dallas Mavericks this season than Christian Wood. And obviously Christian Wood, who was traded on, to the Mavericks on draft night, at times looked like a player offensively that Mavericks fans were like, hey, keep that dude on the floor. But other times you looked at and said, for all the points that he scored on the offensive end, he gave it all back on the defensive end. Before we get specifically into Wood, why was he so polarizing for the Mavericks this year, based on your observation and how you covered him and what you were able to see from him on a night-to-night basis?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with, like, if you kind of take it from the start, they're a team coming off a Western Conference Finals appearance. So I think, like, from the start of the season, there's at least some benefit of the doubt that a lot of people have for a team of that kind, where it's like, okay, well, I'm going to trust, the winning culture, if you will, and like, the lineups that they're going to pick. Like those guys were with this team that made it that far. But I think the effectiveness, like, I don't think it was fully like kind of understood with some of the personnel, like starting, like opening night, you can take an example, like Reggie Bullock, Dorian, and JaVale as the 3 through 5 with Spencer and Luka. Like, I think there was a thought, like, okay, well, if we just have someone who can, like, block some shots, grab some rebounds, roll to the rim, and set screens for Luka and pick and roll, and then other people space out, and then Spencer can do some off the dribble, attacking at times as well. We should be good. All we need is the bench to basically keep pace, score some points, get some stops, and Christian Wood can be an integral part of that as a sixth man. But I think part of the problem as the season went on is that, like, you kind of look at what the results were. They're not this great defensive team. And it's like, okay, so at what point does it make more sense to kind of go all in on, like, we're just going to score a ton of points and see what works and, things of that nature. And I think the contract status kind of creates more of a pressure to kind of figure things out and try things as well. Like when you're signing up for a guy who's in the final year of his deal, it's hard to kind of go through a full season where you don't try, like, okay, well, would he be a good option for us as a starter? Or is he best for a sixth man? Well, you tried a sixth man role to start, but it's like injuries kind of required them to start him. That wasn't really like we're going to set out to start him. Like, I feel like that's kind of where there's a more of a controversial aspect started to come into play, is that they were kind of forced into starting him with the injuries. Like, I remember Tim McMahon, I think it was like either the week of or very like close leading up to it, he reported that it would be like unforeseen circumstances for Christian Wood to start. And then injuries. Yeah. Like just the way the Mavs season went, like injuries, like not saying that's inaccurate, but it's like injuries happen, they piled up, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, we are like Christian Wood's going to start. And then, you look at the win-loss record, all that stuff. They played some bad teams, but 9-4 when Luka started with Christian Wood, and that was a successful general stretch for a team that had a losing record. And I think that's where it becomes a constant kind of argument where it's like, some people will look at like the net ratings, the plus minus, others will look at win loss, but then it's like overall, it's like what's necessarily the identity that even would be smart to establish that could work and then build towards playoff success. Like there's just so much like layers to it. And it's like, at the end of the day, they're a team that didn't even make the play in. And it's like arguing about some of these smaller details and all that stuff. It's like, it's kind of like, at some point, let's just see what they do in the off season.
True.
It's like at the end of the day, if someone wins an argument and they don't even qualify for the play-in, it's like who even?
It doesn't even matter.
What's the end game there? It is what it is at that point.
And we're definitely going to get into that because May 16th is coming right around the corner, and Mavericks fans are sitting on pins and needles, hoping that they are able to keep this top 10 protected pick and hopefully not have to send it to New York. But for me, looking at this team throughout the course of the year, it felt like what they had in terms of my identity last year, defensive team, especially during the second half of the year last season, really good on that end. It just never came together for them defensively this season. Obviously, personnel changed quite a bit, inconsistency on that side of the floor. What did you see defensively from this team that changed so much aside from the personnel? I know they dealt with injuries, obviously with Josh Green, Maxi Kleber missed extended time, with the hamstring injury. But what did you see defensively that changed or switched up so much that caused them to be so poor on that end, it felt like, this past season?
Yeah, I think if you even look at kind of those January kind of parts of the schedule where, they were starting, Dwight Powell, and then they had Dorian and Reggie Bullock. There were some games where they put it together and it worked well. Like I think against the Miami Heat, they had a game where, they were flying around. It kind of looked like that team that they were last year, where like they made the initial closeout. Someone was in position with the extra effort, and then they closed the play. But like I think that's just a hard style to kind of sustain. Like you're making all these extra efforts, and I think that takes a toll throughout a whole Western Conference Finals run, and then throughout a regular season. Like that's something that you can kind of get to. I feel like when you're switching the style up within a game, like like Golden State can go to Draymond at the 5, and it's extremely effective whenever they do it, because you have to change your principles, and that gives them some versatility. But there's a reason why Draymond isn't always at the 5, and it takes a physical toll to kind of start the game and do that over and over and over again throughout a game, and then play a full season. And I think that's just kind of something that happened with them, is that it's just hard to replicate that style. And then I don't think the wing defense was as, impactful on the ball this season. I think, being less effective containing that initial penetration, that's a very hard style to, even harder, I should say, when you're like having to then make all those extra efforts even more, because that initial penetration is more frequent. And there's just less pressure, like basically less resistance, I should say, from the initial point of attack defender. So I think that kind of adds overall over time. And then, just you start to question, like, okay, this can't be really our base identity. Like, like we don't have the personnel for this. Like if you had a high level rim protector, maybe you could get away with that because they can close plays easier, and just like there's more like resistance for paint pressure from the other team. Like I talked to a couple players that played against the Mavs, like kind of after the All-Star break, and they were just kind of alluding to the fact that there was no interior presence. Like that's hard to funnel people off the line into personnel that where you don't have an interior presence. Like the opponent, like sometimes it's like in practice, if you catch someone by surprise by not having, like whatever you would call that interior presence, and you get a stop, that's great. But if the opponent kind of feels emboldened, where they have that confidence, where they're like they can't stop me, like that's kind of an extra layer, to your attack. Like you're going in a certain kind of way, off the dribble, and stuff like that. I think that all kind of ties into it, and I think they just need the kind of difference making talent, whether it's one or two players, where you can kind of be the calling card of the defense, and kind of form an identity around, and then have a more sustainable style, like just running off the line over and over again and funneling. I think that ended up becoming something they switched away from more kind of in March. I think they pressed a lot of buttons, like, oh, we're going to go big. Okay, we're going to go super small now. Like there was times where there was like 4 shooting guards, if you really want to like kind of boil it down, like, and then you don't have a true rim protector at the 5. Like that, like if you're trying that many things that in the stretch run of a season, that like you're basically pushing all kinds of buttons, and you're not getting the result that you need. So I think that just comes down, like, some coaching can be, complain about, like, as we said earlier, with like kind of what went into the season. But like at the end of the day, there definitely needs to be like personnel changes for you to kind of have an identity that like truly works and you can like rely on throughout a season.
As you were kind of discussing that, it made me think about a team that's currently in the playoffs right now that seemed to find that identity. And I'm talking about the Lakers and what they were able to do at the trade deadline, getting the Jared Vanderbilts of the world and some of these guys like D'Angelo Russell and Hachimura to pair with, Reeves and LeBron and AD. And you've seen the fortunes of them defensively turn completely around. When you look at the Mavericks, do they need to get younger, more athletic, obviously a lot longer and rangier? Will that help them maybe create some of that identity a lot of the ways that the Lakers are able to do on the fly during the course of their season?
Yeah, I definitely think that could help. I think if you are going to kind of play that, flying around the half court style that they did like to play, during the conference finals run, I think you definitely need someone that's got a lot of stamina, someone that's willing to do those extra rotations, that you basically take, like, some of the burden off of the superstar, like someone who's going to basically be like, all right, like, would it be ideal for all 5 players to fly around and like, be like, really quick and locked in? Yes. but I know that I have to do more than
Mm-hmm.
say the superstar. Like I think that's what went into last year. They had that stamina, they had that effectiveness, and but I think also what kind of ties into it is just at sometimes when you have a large enough sample size, other teams just figure out what you're doing as well. Like that I think like youth speed enhances what they could do, but then you kind of need that like that anchor, you know, those kind of like foundational pieces that kind of just have that talent, like genuinely difference making talent that kind of set the tone. Like when I covered the Pacers in the past with Miles Turner and Thaddeus Young and Victor Oladipo, they finished like second or third defensive rating in the whole season. And that's because, like, despite having like you know, Darren Collison and Bojan Bogdanovic at the 1 and the 3, they just had the 4 and the 5 that can just cover things up like crazy. Victor Oladipo, he wasn't the most like phenomenal at like containing drives, but he flew around with his athleticism and his explosiveness, like he was all defense that season. Like you can get away with having some players that aren't going to be the most like impactful if you have those kind of like foundational talents that have that ability to kind of set the tone and kind of, you know, be a foundational piece. And I just don't think the Mavs, you know, even last year, I don't think they had any of those pieces. Like Dorian was probably the closest to that because of how versatile he was, but I don't think you would ever necessarily say like he is like a top like 3 or 4 or 5 in this particular attribute or trait. Like he's very, very good. But it's like, you know, like for the Lakers, Anthony Davis is a complete monster as a rim protector. You know,
Yeah.
like he can do all kinds of stuff. He's elite at a lot of things. Vanderbilt is very, very, very good. You know, you could say elite in things as well. And then they have like that, like as we talked about, like that speed. Like Dennis Schroeder, like, you know, you're not going to always be successful against Steph Curry, but at least they have that speed to kind of, you know, at least like, you know, get around a screen and just like, you know, keep up with him, have that closing speed. There's like the Mavs when they play Steph Curry, like Reggie Bullock did his best, but there's no like like there's a difference between Reggie Bullock and Finney Smith's closing speed and like a Dennis Schroeder's closing speed. So it's like things like that. Like there's certain physical limitations. There's also like there's just talent aspect of it too. Like they just like you know, offense is very important to have those kinds of talents. Like I think if you think of it that way, like Luka is that kind of like transcendent talent you have that your offense like kind of starts with. Same with Kyrie, but who is the equivalent of that on your defense? Like you kind of need those types of talents to kind of be the table setter, if you will.
Speaking of some of those foundational talents, I think one of the things that was most pleasantly surprising for Mavs fans this season, Josh Green was able to develop a little bit of a three-point shot, still some inconsistencies with that at times. But I think the biggest bright spot of all, and I'm sure you could speak to it having watched and covered this team throughout the year, Jayden Hardy seems like a young man who is going to continue to get better. And I think one thing, Grant, that I loved about his game the most is that the fearlessness at which he plays the game with. My man is not afraid of a shot, not afraid to take it to the basket and to try to make things happen. He's obviously still has to grow into his game and grow into what he's capable of. But what did you see from him that should give Mavs fans encouragement that this could be a guy going into the next couple of years that really is going to continue to grow and progress in his game?
Yeah, I think the big thing is, you know, when you kind of enter the, you know, the NBA level, there's got to be some like humility or, you know, unselfishness that kind of goes into it. And, you know, with him, with Hardy, you know, he was willing to play off the ball and attack closeouts and like catch and shoot and do all those types of things and just go in with an open mind. I think that is a very like good indicator of like kind of him growing into his game, as you said. And, you know, I think, you know, as it kind of goes along, you know, one of the areas that even in summer league, I felt like that kind of stood out as a need to improve was kind of just like the reads he's making out of like high ball screens. You know, it's something that I've kind of noticed with a lot of rookies when you kind of just like think about how they're playing the game. Like not to make another like Pacers comparison, it's pure coincidence. But Benedict Mathurin is another player that I think, you know, people like he had the opportunity to have the stats to be like a rookie of the year candidate. But I think what a lot of people kind of like, if you go underneath the surface and kind of look at how he like produced, he was really effective and like off ball actions. Like, you turn the corner, you use your natural talent, and you might make a read, but it's not like a layered like read where it's like a high ball screen where you got to read the low man who's responsible for that weak side corner. And like, there's a lot less like kind of like I guess you could say like chess element to it. And attacking closeouts, we're running in transition, like all that stuff. That's that kind of were areas he excelled at, but making those kind of challenging reads, he did not excel at. But he had those minutes to put up the production, and I feel like offensively, Jayden Hardy is kind of in a similar like space, if you will, and that's like a common thing for young players. So I think like kind of going into summer league, if he does end up participating as he said he will, just seeing how he like kind of shows growth in that area and like building off of the end of the season that he had, I think will be interesting to monitor and will be important going into next season, especially like not to go too far into it, but like if you have a backcourt ideally of Luka and Kyrie, you want that third guard that can create and be effective, especially when there will be times when one of those guys misses games. So that like being able to make those reads is essential, especially with the way the roster is kind of constructed right now.
As we start to finish up here, I'm interested in your perspective on this because, as we were mentioning a little bit earlier, May 16th is coming around the corner, and of course, that's the draft lottery night. The Dallas Mavericks, if that pick falls outside the top 10, will need to send it to Jalen Brunson and company in New York. If you're the Mavericks and you do keep that pick, it's number 10 or better, and let's say it's not number 1 overall, because if it's number 1, we know what you're doing, taking Victor Wembanyama. But let's say it's anything that's not involving taking Victor. Are you keeping that pick and making the pick there, or are you trying to package it maybe with a Tim Hardaway Jr. and trying to find someone to take not only his descending contract, but a top 5, top 10 pick in order to find an established veteran that can really help you right now versus maybe having to wait on a prospect to be able to turn the corner for you?
I think I definitely would like evaluate the trade kind of market and just see what's out there. I think I would also, at the very least, just kind of buy time with it. I wouldn't make a deal like super far out from the draft, mostly because you can kind of see who's a riser, who's a faller, especially like the lottery taking place at the start of the NBA combine. Just gaining some intel and seeing like sometimes like some guys will unexpectedly fall, and you don't want to like trade out of it and been like, oh man, like we had that guy in a rookie contract, like we could have really had something there. But like sometimes there's players that just rise, and like especially wings, like if someone does rise and you wanted to fill a wing spot, and all of them kind of gravitated outside of your pick and the boards and like your intel says, then you might want to just trade it. But then again, you kind of have to find that balancing act of like, what does the rest of the league think with like kind of where players are trending? Would they be interested in trading for that pick if now these players may be out of range? So I think there's like a lot of like complicated layers that kind of go into like the timing of the trade, let alone like what is the value of this pick. And then it also goes into like, who are you trading it with? Like, as you said, like Tim Hardaway, that's probably the best bet. Especially if you want to address with the wing spot. If you were to attach to like a Davis Bertans, do you want me to restart this part?
No, look, making an appearance as well. No, it's good. No, it's good.
Okay, yeah, because my dog's going a little crazy. But yeah, like if you were to attach to like a Davis Bertans, that would be challenging to get like great value out of the pick. Because like he still has time on his deal. Like I know the final year there's like quite a bit of non-guarantee element to it, but like there's limitations in trade value with him. But if you do with Tim Hardaway, I think that's about like 17. I think around like 17 ish $17 million. That could salary match quite a bit. That's something that you could definitely maybe try to find like a guy like if you want a rim protector, maybe like a Miles Turner type or, something like that, like if he's available. And, finding wings is tough because you'd have to really like kind of find a team that I feel like if you're in contender mode, you don't want to give up your wings. So then you kind of have to go into like who's available on a rebuilding team potentially. what would be worth trading the 10th pick for, if, assuming that's like kind of where the range is, and who would want to also take on that salary. I think that's kind of where it would trend towards a rebuilding team, because those teams are more willing to take on those salaries. It's so easy to find like those kind of like shooting guard, like volume shooter types that like I think a contender would probably like more so pass on like a Tim Hardaway, like unless they're like really in a bind. Like Cleveland, was a team that was floated midseason as potentially having interest. And when you go to the playoffs, like they were in a really tough spot. Like Isaac Okoro still hasn't developed a three. Osman was a guy they were closing with, and he was getting picked on the switches. But if you're Cleveland, like, do you think Tim Hardaway will stack up better on those switches when you're closing games? Like probably not. So it's like that's where you become reluctant to take like that type of trade if you're Cleveland, because you got to win with Donovan Mitchell's timeline. So I think just in general, like just finding like probably like a wing or a rim protector that's on that rebuilding team would probably make the most sense. But you don't want to give up too much value with the 10th pick. But when you look at their overall trade assets, that's where it gets complicated with how gridlocked like the next few years are. Because then ideally you wouldn't want to give up the top 10 pick in this year's draft. But when you only have a 2027 that you can utilize in that scenario, and all your seconds are cleaned out for 7 years, that's where the trade situation gets a little complicated. Then you start to be like, okay, well, what if I put in maybe like a Josh Green or something instead? So that like there's a lot of different like little layers. I feel like that'll be interesting to see how they kind of evaluate it as they kind of get closer to the draft, for sure.
Yeah, the path forward is a difficult one for the Mavericks to traverse, given the resources and assets that they are trying to utilize in order to make this happen, to keep Luka Doncic happy, which is, of course, is the name of the game for this franchise. Last question for you. I said it a little bit earlier, but I kind of want to explore it just a little bit more, because you obviously had a chance to go on the road with this team a lot more, especially during the second half of the year. And in a lot of ways, Grant, you became kind of the people's champ for the MFFLs and Mavs fans out there with the viral videos and the questions and the things that you were doing. How did you grow as a reporter and as someone who covers this team, and seeing the kind of effect not just your coverage was having, but obviously the tremendous response to it, given what you were able to do this past season and wanted to do more going forward for covering this team?
Yeah, I think the big thing was I haven't really like done like the consistent like like day-to-day in person like kind of coverage of a team because of the coronavirus like restrictions and all. Like because you remember like when we were at the like the few games I went to, we were up top like like that Clippers Mavs playoff game. Like you can't really go to a press conference and ask a question and gain that experience if like you're up top and like everything's blocked off and there's no fans like even in the building. Or well, I guess there were at that time, but like what I mean, like it's just like it's just a weird environment. Like it's not even like the real setup. Like unless you wave your hand on Zoom and what you're doing, you're probably gonna be boxed out of that one. So like I definitely like kind of went into it with the idea of like kind of challenging myself. Like I want to like like I don't want to leave with nothing. Like I want to, when I go into this game or this practice, I have an idea of what I want to ask, and I also like I'm gonna challenge myself to get it done. Especially with Luka early in the season when he was playing so well, it's challenging to kind of get those questions off at times, because everyone's interested in asking him a question, especially when he's playing so well, and like other people outside of like that regular like Dallas kind of like reporter group, if you will, are there to ask questions as well. So like I got some interesting things from him, kind of focusing on like getting like those basketball insights. Like I remember like I wasn't posting them at that time. Like I kind of figured out what I was doing as I went throughout the season. But like something that I thought was really cool was like he told me about like, or like the answer like a couple of years ago, someone told me I couldn't take those 2-point shots, like the pull up twos. And then like people were like, wait, who was it? Like they started like guessing like who it was, and like like, oh wow, like you really weren't allowed to do that. Okay. Like like little insights like that are kind of interesting, like as a guy's like scoring 30 for like 9 straight games and all that stuff. But yeah, it's kind of interesting too, because you kind of learn like as you go. Like Like how challenging is it like within like a shorter period on a road game? You know, who kind of is enthusiastic still and
Mm-hmm.
unenthusiastic after a loss? Who wants to kind of just get out of there? You know, all that kind of stuff. Like you kind of learn a lot when you're doing it that way, and then know like, you know, like, okay, I can expect to get this, and I want to write this story about this topic, and you know, it'll probably take this amount of games, and you know, this practice. Like, hopefully, this guy's going to talk, like that, all that stuff. Like, it's cool to like kind of like learn that all. So then, like next year, when I kind of get into it, I'll know, like, wow, I actually know what a training camp looks like. I'll
Yeah.
actually, yeah, like it's a little different when you have no idea. You're like, oh, this is the door I go through to go to training camp, like stuff like that. Like now I'll know, and it's like comfortable and all that stuff. And yeah, I'll be curious to see, you know, kind of like what I can basically do with stories and all that stuff, like going into next season, for sure.
Well, your work was tremendous this past season covering this team. While, yes, the on the floor product wasn't necessarily what we all thought it was going to be, the coverage around this team was second to none. And obviously, a lot of Mavs fans appreciate the work that you have done and continue to do going forward here for this team. Grant, tell the folks where they can find you and what you got going on as we get ready to go into this important summer for the Mavs.
Yeah, for sure. All my writing, for the most part, is on DallasBasketball.com. You can find me on social media. For my first and last name is my username. How few people have my last name? Grant Afseth, Afseth on pretty much everything. Yeah, so I think I'll be doing a lot of like you know, like kind of focuses on like X's and O's on like player development stuff, like, you know, what a player did well, what they could improve, like especially starting with the young players like Josh Green, Jayden Hardy, and then looking at some draft prospects and trade targets. And then, you know, I'm looking forward to, you know, working to get out to, you know, like summer league and like analyze like the games as they go on. And then, you know, I also have video from Luka's international games, like with Slovenia. So I'll do like breakdowns on that, because I know like people, it's kind of awkward, like if you're working and they're like playing at like during your work day, and it's like some weird,
Right.
like maybe not the most legal way of watching the game too. So you know, I feel like, you know, I'll put together like some breakdowns of like his play and all that stuff with Slovenia for sure too. So there'll be a lot of stuff like, you know, like kind of as the summer kind of gets going after that or around that combine period for sure.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time for joining me on the podcast today. This was a lot of fun, and look to hope to do it again soon, Grant. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it.